We are live right now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight for a conversation regarding the aftermath of George Floyd's horrific murder and community reflections. Tonight's conversation is very important and timely as many Black Americans and allies are celebrating Juneteenth. My name is Ermina Mustafik, and I will be the moderator of tonight's excellent panel. So tonight we are joined by Miss Emma Houston. Emma volunteers and serves on various local boards and commissions and was appointed by the governor as chair. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight for a conversation. I apologize for that. I had the live stream up where I left off. So Emma was appointed by the governor as chair for the MLK Human Rights Commission and recently asked to serve on the Utah COVID-19 Task Force. She is the former director of diversity and inclusion for Salt Lake County government and currently serves in the HR role of training development facilitator with the total responsibility and focus on internal IDEA initiatives. Also on our panel is Gonja Sawyer. She is a PhD candidate and is an adjunct instructor at Utah State University. She has a master's degree in human development and has been teaching various courses in human development and family studies. Since her move to Utah, Gonja has been very vocal about her experiences as a person of a minority group and has always stood with minority populations and advocated for them. She serves as a board member at CAPSA, which stands for Citizens Against Physical and Sexual Abuse. Lastly, we also will be joined tonight with Kamal S. Ahmed. Kamal is an educator and a Black Lives Matter advocate and has been having very needed conversations with our elected officials and police chiefs. Kamal's running a little bit behind today due to a delayed flight, but he will hop on shortly for our conversation. Oh, perfect. It looks like Kamal is joining right now. So I do just want to let the audience know that before I jump into the questions, you can submit live questions in the YouTube live stream and we will get those fed to us. So we will go ahead and just as soon as Kamal gets up and ready, we will begin. Kamal, I believe you're on mute.
Sorry, I am traveling and I just pulled over so I can catch this meeting. So I greatly apologize. My flight was delayed 4 hours.
I'm so sorry, but you made it actually perfectly in time because I just went through the introductions and as soon as I finished introducing you, you hopped on. So if you're okay with it, we'll go ahead and jump into the questions.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So the first question that we have is, what are your immediate reflections on the murder of George Floyd and kind of the aftermath that has followed it with protests and political officials standing up and speaking out? Emma, you can go first.
Thank you. My immediate reactions to what happened to Mr. George Floyd was I questioned humanity. I questioned the thought that how could we as a group of individuals in a collective society allow that to happen? To see a man murdered on live television after it was streamed via a cell phone video. My question in humanity, I lost some faith in how we interact with each other, how we condone bad behavior, and I was extremely sad. And then I became extremely numb because what has been happening over the last few years has been consistent with the brutality of Black lives, brown bodies, and how they have come to the end of their lives in a very brutal way. The protests, we are a nation that has been built on protests. When something is unjust, we go out, we vote, we march, we protest. And this particular protest took another turn. to bring out the anger and the hurt and the disappointment. And although it started out as a kind, gentle protest to speak about injustices, opportunists also came in to create destruction. So when you think about how we protest in a civilized way, but then we think about how we protest when the anger builds up so much that it overflows, that we then destroy things. We have to keep an even balance on how our message is getting out. What is being viewed? Are we being viewed because we are hurt and we are trying to make some social justice changes? Or are we viewed as being so angry and so hurt that we wish to destroy our own communities? So my initial response was absolutely sadness, absolutely sadness. The protests, I understand the protests, but I also understand how the protest needs to take shape and how we are viewed when we are protesting in this particular manner.
That was very, very well put, Emma. Thank you. Gonja or Kamal, do you guys have some input regarding that in your reflection? Go ahead, Gonja.
Okay. My feelings right after the videos of George Floyd being released, honestly, I couldn't watch them. I saw the picture and I was like, okay, that's enough for me, because I know what to expect. I know what I'm going to see, because we see it over and over and over and over again. And it becomes, for some people especially, it comes to a point that you become desensitized. I think one of the reasons that we as a society fail to create this amount of response like we are doing right now for George Floyd, is because of that, because we see this happening over and over and we're like, oh, there's another Black person died. Well, it's a part of the story. So I purposefully did not watch the video, but my first thought was sadness, and the second one was, when is the protest? When is the protest? When are we going? When are we putting our signs into our yards and joining into this conversation that we are having today?
Thank you, Gonja. I honestly got chills when you were saying that, when you were speaking to the fact that we all know what happened before we even finished the video. It's that much of a reality. Kamal, what is your response?
It was a confirmation of what our people have been going through since they've been brought to this country. I was speaking with Pastor Francis Davis yesterday, and he brought up something very powerful. He said after President Obama was elected, many within the African American community thought, like these days were behind us, are going to be behind us. And he said, as a matter of fact, it's just how it was when he was going through the civil rights movement. And I thought that was a very powerful message. I mean, our people have a history of our men being murdered, and excuse my language, but our women being raped. And our people have a history of these abuses. And it's been from the moment we stepped into this country. Now there has been progress made, but at the same time, when we see the unfortunate events that are happening across America right now, we have to go back and think about the relationship within slavery, of how police forces were used to capture slaves, within Reconstruction, how society used the police force to justify murders, hangings, etc. And we have to understand that that has been a part of our history. And we have to, as a country, acknowledge that and work together in order to remove the system that instilled that and replace it with one that is sustainable and one that's going to benefit all people, and not attack just one demographic of America's population out of proportion from the others, which is the case with the African American people in America.
Thank you, Kamal. Like you said, it's very deeply entrenched, and it's going to take a collective effort to bring freedom and bring responsible reform. So regarding that, what are the responsibility of and roles of non-Black communities and allies? What is our role in this movement, and how can we further the message while still uplifting Black voices?
I think the important part is that this is a human issue, and that all of us who live on this planet have a voice. And in order for change to happen, those who are now creating the narrative, those who are in power, need to take an opportunity to not be bystanders, but to be upstanders. And when you hear something, when you see something, it is our collective responsibility to correct that behavior, to call that behavior out. It is not for the Black and brown individuals to continue to lead the charge, to do the heavy lifting. We are exhausted. We are exhausted. It is not for us to do the continual education of this. There are so many ways that you can have conversations with individuals who may not come from your demographics, but for white America to silently sit back and not change individually, but also collectively. And when I say collectively, I mean, when you go home and have conversations with your family, can we all agree that what we saw happen to Mr. George Floyd was inhumane? Can we all just agree on that? And if we can agree on that, can we also have conversations on how can we change this narrative so that it will stop? And how can we use our collective voices? So for individuals who come from a different demographics, it is your time to stand up. And we see it in the protests. The protests are a demographics of individuals. We have everyone out there voicing their concerns. The thing is that this is not a trend. This is not an event. This is a lived experience. And once the cameras go away, once the anger subsides, will the initiatives be put in place? Will we still be raising our voices to say this too will change? And I will lend my voice to this call. I will call my legislators. I will call my congressmen. I will call my leaders. I will go and vote. I will change so that this next generation that comes up will not be having the very same conversation. That's how we do it.
Thank you, Emma. Kamal, actually, I would like to go to you. What are your thoughts on the responsibilities? Emma spoke a lot to it, and she put it very well. Do you have any additional comments?
Yeah, no, she put it very well. It's hard to build off of that. With Martin Luther King, one of the most powerful things in his movement was the cooperation of people from very diverse backgrounds. And it takes our voice, just our voice historically in this country has never been enough, unfortunately. And that's just the reality. We need help from all other demographics. We need help from everyone. It's a collective effort. We need help from everyone to give their voice about what's happening to our people unjustly and in a way that is not in proportion to what's happening to the common American. We need help. We need voices. And there are many people speaking up. We need more. We need more.
And Gonja, how have you taken on a role as an ally and as an advocate to speak up for the Black Lives Matter movement and the injustice in the country?
It's right now living in Logan, especially, we do not have a very diverse population here. Only diversity we see is usually on campus, and the students not being here just takes that away from us. But coming to Utah from Dallas, living in a very diverse population, I had friends, very dear friends who are Black, and I had colleagues who happen to be Black, and we're sharing the same environment, we're sharing the same office, together. And one of the things that I realized early on was after a friend of mine made a comment about one of our colleagues, that it's so important that they have some sort of representation in each and every single area, so that people can finally realize that they are existing, they are not going anywhere, and we need to face this reality that we are sharing our world with them. So if we have a right, if we have the freedom, they have the same right. They at least should have the same right and same freedom as we have. So what I do personally, I'm an educator. So teaching is a big part of my life. So with that, I read a lot, right? I read a lot, I watch a lot. Me and my partner, we're both social scientists. So these are like our dinner conversations. Most of the time, the things that are happening in the news and things like that. And most of the time I try to stop myself and not post anything on Facebook, so that, or any other social media platform, so that people whose voices need to be heard can be heard. And what I do is like I check on my friends. If I have any Black friends, I have like one particular friend here in Logan that I check on him, I text him, or I Facebook message him, make sure that he's okay, make sure that he's safe and things like that. The first thing I did was check on my friends, whether they are here in Logan, here in Utah, or in Dallas, or anywhere else. And then reading. But just one thing that I want to make sure that people understand, we need to accept that we are all racist. In some way, in one way or another, it's important that we are understanding the fact that we are either racist or we have racial, what is that word? Gosh, that just got away from me. But we have tendencies. Yes, we have tendencies to be racist, or we have tendencies to say things that we're not supposed to say, or things like that. So understanding that we are, in one way or another, are racist is acknowledging that we as people, as ourselves, as individuals, need to also change and take a look at ourselves. So that's one of the things that I've tried to do in this past couple of weeks. How did I grow up? Do I know enough about my own history, or the people in the United States history enough to say that, yeah, I'm not a racist person? Because most of the time when you look at conversations, they start like this: I'm not a racist, then comes a but. And then people have the tendency to say everything racist that they can say. So it's important to realize that we have our tendencies and we can be wrong, but being aware that I can be wrong, I can make mistakes, but I'm willing to learn from my mistakes. And I do not expect my Black friends to correct me or ask my Black friends to teach me about the history. It's my job as an individual to learn about these facts. If I'm a human, if I want to be kind, if I want to be an ally, that's my job, not their jobs to explain it to us,
Go ahead, Emma.
And I just want to talk about racist, but also want to talk about biases. And when we talk about racist, we talk about someone being a racist, that means that I am going to cause you harm because of the color of your skin. I am going to physically hurt you. I am going to eliminate your ability to move up into any type of position of power or understanding. When we talk about biases, it's because of our lived experiences. And my biases can either be a positive or a negative. So if I think a certain thing, my mother said to us as we were growing up, stay away from people with tattoos. People with tattoos are bad people. My mother never met anyone with a tattoo. Never had a conversation with anyone with a tattoo. Right at this moment, I have a tattoo. Her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren. So when you think about my bias, that is a perception that I have, that is a lived experience that I have. But when you think about racism, if my mother said people with tattoos are bad people and I am going to hurt them because they have a tattoo, that is when your racism come in. When you can physically hurt someone, deprive someone of their civil liberties, that's when racism comes in. Biases are a total different thing, and we all have those. And I understand in regards to we can have tendencies that can lead either way. But when you talk about racism, that means I have power over you. And I have power over you because of the color of your skin, because the country you come from, because of the language that you speak, because of whatever those labels we place on them. And I have the power to hurt you. That is basically what racists do. They hurt you. They burn your home. They kill you. They destroy your property. That because you are a Black, a brown, whatever person you are, that is what a racist does. Someone who has biases, they can turn into a racist. But my biases will be my lived experiences and how I interact with you. And we can change our bias because our awareness comes up when I am in a space and I behave a certain way. When I see someone with a tattoo, why am I behaving this way? I'm not going to harm you, but my mother said, you are a bad person. So I can change my behavior knowing that people with tattoos are not bad people. But when we talk about racism, that's another level. That's another level. And I hear you, my sister. I absolutely hear you on that.
Thank you for correcting that. That's what I tried to. That's what I did. So that's what I meant. So I'm glad that you were, I'm glad that you went ahead and corrected me in that one. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, guys. I think the prejudice that is very much real and these biases that we hold have a lot to do with us not learning history correctly and much of history being erased when it relates to minority communities and not those in power. So since two of you on the panel are educators, and Emma, you do a lot of work educating people within different ways, what are your guys' answers to implementing real history back into our education system, and how you as educators yourselves can prevent racism and combat injustice?
That's interesting that you brought that up. I actually had a Facebook post earlier today, this morning about that. Our educational system has to do justice to the various groups in our country who have historically went through a lot of pain and suffering, starting with the Native Americans. We have to start with the natives in this country. And if you study anything, especially Western expansion, with the Native Americans and how they were systematically removed and replaced, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee should be a mandatory book nationwide on the suffering of the Native American Indians. That should be a mandatory book school-wide that we read. Little steps like that will help educate those and give those a better understanding of the suffering that we go through today. You see many of the same tactics back then. Slavery, the transatlantic slave trade has to thoroughly be taught. Slavery has to thoroughly be taught. Reconstruction has to thoroughly be taught. The civil rights movement has to thoroughly be taught. And the way to do this is not necessarily having, because it's going to, especially in a place where we don't have a large African American, especially qualified African American population to teach, or population generally to teach. There's certain books that will do a great justice to that. For instance, on the civil rights movement, the autobiography of Dr. Martin Luther King is a great book. If you don't want to read autobiography, Devil in the Grove about Thurgood Marshall and one of his various battles in the Florida Panhandle. And just that one book will sum up the civil rights movement for you, Devil in the Grove. It's simple things like that that we can implement within our educational system. It's not hard to do. We call it where we just teach across different levels. For instance, this doesn't all have to be taught in history class. That can be part of your English content. Just those historical books. So there's ways to get it done. We have to do better together in order to demand this change in our educational systems.
Thank you, Kamal. Emma or Gonja, do either of you want to respond or add to that?
I think one of the things that is most important today is a celebration of Juneteenth. And of course, 1862, when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed by executive order to say that it was illegal. It was illegal to buy and sell a human being. It was illegal. It took a piece of paper, an executive order to say that. And although we are 155 years into the Juneteenth celebration, what we are understanding is that the majority of America does not know American history, that the narrative of the Black experience is a small snippet, and it starts with slavery. And Blacks were much more before they were slaves. So when we think about how are we educating our children, are we telling them the full story, or are we telling them what is comfortable? Are we telling them what is in our inner circle? What is our lived experience? Or are we giving them the opportunity to go across and broaden their understanding of how this nation was built? Who all played a part in creating the nation that we live in? Who had opportunities and who did not have opportunities? Who is in the middle? Who is on the outliers? Who created this space as we live in now? And I think once we educate individuals, as we raise our children will also say there needs to be a change. You can't change what you do not know what happened. So in order for us to educate, we need to give the full text of what history is all about and understand that our children, our next generations, are going to be the ones to help move this needle. When you have a clear understanding of your entire being, of your authentic self, of those who you live in the community with, you would want to say, we need to change our behavior. We need to change the direction that we're going. We need to be inclusive. We need to understand what diversity, access, and equality means. And it starts with me individually. So to educate a child starts with truth.
Thank you, Emma. And Gonja, what is your response?
I do want to add very shortly, being in academia, when the first class of the first session of my courses is usually the theories. So we talk about founding fathers of psychology, founding fathers of social sciences. And even the name, saying that word makes me icky, because we are overlooking, we are ignoring a lot of the female scientists that had great accomplishments and helped help social sciences become social sciences, right? The same thing happens with hard sciences. So a few weeks ago, since the first protests started to happen, I'm a member in a Facebook group, basically, and it's full of women from different backgrounds. They're all academics. Most of them, the majority of them, are mothers. So we started talking into how can we amplify the voices that needs to be amplified? How can we amplify the people of color who have contributed a ton to the sciences, and we're basically not necessarily recognizing them, because we're always, when we're talking about the foundations, we're always going back to those fathers, right? So this is one of the things that I'm personally going to integrate into my research. Find people of color, find academics who are person of color and who made contributions that are possibly very, very similar to the people, very similar to the contributions of white people, basically, so that we can change this. We can change this, like, voices that we keep hearing repeatedly, and just keep that academic institution as white as possible, right? So this is one of the things that came up several times and have been discussed in a way that we can, so that we're not overlooking people who have been silenced systematically, not only in academia, we see this systematic racism in every single part of the structure that we look at. So that's, as an academic, that's like one of my goals to do, integrate more people in my research that are basically saying the same thing, but written by a minority person who could be a person of color or not. And another thing that we try to do in our house, I have two kids who are 6 and 8 years old. So they are at that age that they don't see color, right? But I want them to see the color. I want them to recognize the color exists, and some inequalities exist because people think color is bad or color is different. So that's why we are facing the issues that we are facing today. So what we try to do is that we have a library, some of it like you see right behind me. We try to add picture books that are representative of different people, that are written by people of color, that are written by female authors, so that we have that diversity. Because if I'm only covering my kids with the things that they will feel familiar with, comfortable with, that they're not going to get into any uncomfortable conversations, that I'm doing something wrong, then I believe that I'm doing something wrong. So yeah, those are two things that I wanted to mention.
Thank you, Gunja. I also just wanted to kind of add and clarify this notion that kids don't see Black. I think when white people see a Black kid and a white kid interacting, and they see them playing together without a problem, they think to themselves, that kid doesn't see color. What they should be thinking to themselves is, this is how normal people should interact. Like, you see that color, the kids see color, kids aren't colorblind, but kids haven't learned racism yet, and kids haven't gone to school where like the history has been erased. So I just kind of wanted to point that out and add that to the conversation, that this whole notion of kids don't see color, that's because we think that that's the only way that people can treat people equally, but there's really an easy way, and it's just being a human. Sorry, the next question is, so obviously the problems and issues we're seeing are very deep and they're systemic. So that is institutional racism existing across many areas of US society. So how do we undo that? How do we work towards progress in combating the entrenched racism? Is it small steps? Is it a few big pieces? Emma?
I think everything that we have done throughout the years that you have seen, as far as the first time that enslaved individuals were brought here, and how colonization happened, and all of the things that Kamal talked about in regards to the Atlantic slave trade and westward expand, all of those things. And each decade, there is something that comes up, that there is an injustice that goes on. And we have these conversations and we make these small steps and we see a change. And we make these small steps and we see a change. And we make these small steps. And I think that is what we are comfortable with, that we can't have a big mass overhaul of everything, because then that means someone feels that they have lost power, that they have given up something, not realizing that there is enough to go around. So I think one of the things that we need to consider is that what is the pressing moment right now? The fact that Mr. George Floyd lost his life by someone who was sworn to protect him. What do we need to do at this moment to help with having conversations and creating policies that are going to reform behavior? So if we can focus on what can we do right now, what slice can we cut out right now that will go across the nation, that will go across the globe? And if it is police reform, what does that look like? How do we implement it? How do the changes happen? How do the policies? What do we look at statutes that have been on code in the books for X amount of years and have stayed there, but we have not looked at it to say this needs to come off. This statute does no longer apply, or this statute may be discriminatory toward a certain group of individuals. We need to do the deep dive, and when it gets hard, when someone pushes back, we need to continue to move forward and make those changes happen. So we have to identify what is it right now. And the talk right now is police reform, whatever that looks like. It will be different in each community, but what does that look like? And who is willing to sit at the table and bring the voices to the table who have been dramatically impacted by that? I'm sorry. Did I stop?
No, I apologize.
Okay.
It may be on my end.
Okay. But that's my 2 cents. Incremental changes.
So I just want to build off of that if I can. I'm sorry, I didn't go through the introductions. Miss Houston, do you mind if I call you Miss Houston? Is that okay, or do you prefer Emma? You brought up you brought up 2 very important points that I strongly believe are the keys: incremental change and doing it step by step, because that's what lays that solid foundation. But I really love the educational aspect that you brought up earlier on before we were slaves. That piece is so often missed in our educational system, especially outside of the historic African or just African American communities. For instance, my father went to Douglas High School in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, at a time when segregation was still happening. It was the only African American high school. They learned things like this in the high school where he went. He was able to grow with a proud identity of who his people were, what they've been through, and where they're at now. And you hit that on the point of who we were before the transatlantic slave trade. Those kingdoms of Songhai, the Ashanti, the Mali, we have to learn this. That's important. And I love that piece you hit on who we were before, as well as the incremental changes. I think I strongly believe that those are just 2 solid points that that's the blueprint. That's our blueprint.
Can you guys hear me now? Okay, awesome. Thank you. I'm sorry, I lost connection for a little bit. I believe that the comments you guys made were very much accurate. I will go ahead and jump into the next question and keep us kind of flowing. We have about 20 minutes left and we still have some live audience questions. So the next question is, what roles might civil society service organizations, such as community organizations, take up in times of this? Gonja, would you like to answer?
Yes, sure. One thing that I can speak of is basically not be afraid of getting into these uncomfortable conversations, because if we are always in our comfort zone, that's not where the change happens, right? We need to get out of our comfort zone, and we need to be, I mean, at this point, we have to get out of our comfort zone so that, you know, when Emma, when she was answering the first question, she said, we're exhausted. They are exhausted. I mean, who wouldn't be exhausted after facing the same issues and living with them over and over again? So as allies, I try to be an ally, and I strongly encourage everyone to learn how to be an ally. It's important not to get stuck in our comfort zone, because here is one thing. When you have a social media account, when you keep seeing news related to, you know, disasters, or, I mean, let's say the COVID-19, or what we have been seeing with George Floyd over the past weeks, do we have a choice to just close our social media account and forget about it? We do. It's a choice. But these people who are facing racism, they cannot just shut their, you know, social media accounts and be like, all right, I'm done for today, I'm gonna just go and chill. They don't have that option. They do not have that choice, nor they do not have an option to change their skin color. This is not a choice for them. So it's important that we understand that, and we take our steps in supporting in whatever way that they need us to support them. Let it, I mean, whether it's a small organization, whether it's a big organization, if your organization is not doing anything, do it yourself. I mean, speak for yourself, speak for the humanity you have in your heart, you know, in your heart. It is important to get out of that environment that, oh, we're all good, or oh, we're all fine, we're all happy, and, you know, whatever. We're not there. We're not there yet. We haven't been there yet. And if we want to get there, honestly, we need to do the work. And that work starts with reading, learning, and holding ourselves accountable for the change. Like, you know, if we're talking about a police reform, right? What does it look like? How does it look like? And who gets to make the decisions in those in those reforms, in those you know, laws? We as citizens have a lot to say. I mean, we have representatives that we can call. If you can't do anything, write a letter to the editor. I mean, there are thousands of templates of how you can compile a letter to the editor. Like, speak up, give reactions to what you are seeing, what you are hearing, and don't be afraid to, you know, maybe losing a few friends over this. If you are losing friends because you are speaking up, you are standing up for discrimination and racism, then those people do not deserve to be your friend, because you deserve a better environment. You deserve to be in a better supportive environment with the people, you know, like-minded. And I'm not saying that, oh, ignore all the opposite voices that you hear. It's important to listen to them as well. because they have a right to speak and they have a right to be heard as well. But if those voices are silencing what the important voices are trying to, tell you, then yeah, mute them a little bit and pay attention to what needs to be paid attention to currently.
Thank you, Gonja. And how about Emma and Kamal? Do you guys have any advice for community organizations that might not usually work in this field?
So there are many organizations locally here as well as nationally. First of all, Emerald Hills Institute. I know the work that you all do in the community as far as educating in regards to the Muslim community. Have a conversation, find out what the initiatives are that they're doing as far as how to support them. Of course, you got the NAACP, you got the Black Lives Matters, you've got Journey of Hope, who helps women who have been incarcerated get back into society. You have the Sojourner group, who help women who have been emotionally abused. But you also have Racially Just Utah. You have the Utah Pride Center. You have so many organizations that whatever is your passion that follows their mission, call them up, have a conversation. If nothing else, write a check. Volunteer for what their causes are and get actively involved. But also in your place of employment, have a conversation with the leaders at the top. Have a conversations with the leaders at the top. If the mission of your organization, your business, your corporation doesn't mention diversity anywhere, doesn't mention equity, inclusion, access, that may not be the place you want to spend 40 hours a week at. So have conversations with the goals and the initiative and get an understanding of what do the leaders that you spend the majority of your time working with, what do they believe about inclusion and equity and access and diversity? What do they believe? So you can start small and you can branch out, but you have to start somewhere. Just start somewhere.
Great advice. And Kamal, how about you? What do you think about community organizations and their role?
I think that was so well put. We really need to focus on what was just said. That's extremely important. If I had anything, it would do it injustice to something just brilliantly put. So just to go off what was said before me, my humble advice would be just to focus on what was just said, replay it, and act upon joining or helping one of those organizations, or what was so very well put, donating to them. That was an extensive list of resources. Let's reflect upon that and act upon it.
Most definitely. So starting small, donating somewhere, getting engaged at least a little. So that is it for like the questions that we had written out. So now we're going to go to live audience questions. I'm just going to take a look at those. So the audience has been watching and they've responded to you guys and asked things as you go. So this question is for Emma and Kamal. And the question asks, were you taught Juneteenth in the curriculum at schools? Were you taught about it?
You're wanting us to give us our ages, aren't you? You are wanting to.
I didn't ask this question. It is a live audience. It's
my goodness, I know it's a question. I did not learn about Juneteenth until I got to college. I went to the University of Houston in Texas. I did not know about Juneteenth. And the reason that I learned about Juneteenth in Houston is because Reverend Jack Yates was one of the founders of Juneteenth and created Emancipation Park in Houston, Texas. So I learned about that in my very early college years and have just implemented that on a regular basis of continuing to learn about Juneteenth.
Looks like we lost Kamal there for a little bit. The next question is, where do you guys see the Black Lives Matter movement within the next 5 years? Is that something that we can predict?
I'm so sorry, I just got disconnected. Can you repeat that question for me, please?
Yeah, of course, Kamal. So the next question that we had is, where do you see the Black Lives Movement 5 years from now? And the previous question regarded if you were taught Juneteenth in your school curriculum.
No, I wasn't. So I came from a family. My father was in the Nation of Islam. He was highly influenced by the teachings of Malcolm X. Actually, he heard Louis Farrakhan in person over at Stanford. He attended Stanford University before he went to. He done his undergrad at Stanford, and he became highly just influenced by Louis Farrakhan. So within that movement, within the nation, Juneteenth, when I was growing up, wasn't highly emphasized. Like we weren't taught about it. But what we were taught about was an extensive amount of Black history, like dates, celebration dates by our government weren't really emphasized. It was more understanding what has been done and how are we going to get out of it, how are we going to move forward as a people. 5 years from now, that's a great question. It's one of those, it depends, it depends on how much work we do. It depends on, are we really sincere about this cause? It depends on, do we want press time? Because right now, the popular thing to do is go to a rally, speak at it, get on the news. That's a popular thing. Everyone wants that. But who wants to work behind the scenes and actually get things done? Who wants to do the work when the spotlight's not on you? Because that's when it really counts. And that's when we're really going to find out who's really with us and not with the popular movement. And that's, in all honesty, that's what I'm waiting for. I'm waiting for the lights to turn off, for the cameras to shut off and say, and just ask that question, all right, who's with us now? Now it's time to get to work. Who's with us?
And then Ganja, what do you guys see? Kamal mentioned that it matters what we do now, how much work is actually done. And to that point, is it just a social media trend? How do we prolong this movement to make sure that it's not just a fad, because people's lives and their livelihood shouldn't be a trend?
So I really believe, like what Kamal has said, it depends on what happens between now and 5 years. What policies have been in place, what reform has happened, who has carried the torch to say. And the thing is that what we don't want to do is to get comfortable to think, oh, we've solved the problem. We can now go back to whatever our lives was before Black Lives Mattered. What we need to do is be vigilant in seeing that there is consistent change, whether it's incremental changes or if there's a huge change. 5 years from now, hopefully we will not have this conversation again, but then again, history has shown that this conversation has repeated itself, but in different forms. So I am with Kamal to say, who's on our side to help move this forward? And by on our side, who's on the side of humanity to move this forward?
And then, Ganja, unless you want to add to that, there are just one or two more questions that I'd like to ask before we wrap up. Awesome. So, what are your thoughts? So we spoke a little bit about Juneteenth, if people are taught about it. A lot more people know what Juneteenth now is because of Black Lives Matter movement and the progression of the protests. So what are your thoughts regarding Juneteenth becoming much more known? And in addition, how do you feel about the efforts to make Juneteenth a federal holiday? Because what I've heard a lot of people say is making it a holiday is nice, but that's not the real change we need. Change these policies instead. So what are your guys' thoughts on that? Whoever would like to go first, go ahead. We have about 6 minutes.
Shouldn't you lock the door?
I was asking Kamal, is he going to address that?
I would prefer for you to go first. You're the scholar on this table, and with all due respect, with 6 minutes left, as much as we can hear from you, it'd be great.
You're muted, Emma.
Thank you. I appreciate Kamal. Thank you. One of the things that I think is that we have always gone back to education. what education looks like. The fact that Juneteenth, and there has been this trend across the nation because of what has been going on, to say that Nike is going to give their employees Juneteenth off as a paid holiday. The Miller Utah Jazz Foundation, we're going to give our employees off as a holiday. My question to those organizations is that, what does your internal organization look like? How are you educating individuals about the importance, not that this is a Juneteenth holiday, but what does it refer to? Why did it become what it is? So it's all about education, but it's also about your executive team. When I look at Nike, when I look at Target, when I look at the Miller Foundation, when I look at all of these organizations, tell me who is at the table, who's in the boardroom, who's making the decisions, who's in leadership positions, what are you doing in community? What are you doing in communities that are underrepresented? Thank you for the holiday. Thank you for the time off. But show me by your words, your deeds, and your actions how you're going to sustain this. Because Juneteenth will be here again in 2021, in 2022, in 2023. What have you done to show that you are committed to amplifying voices that have been underrepresented? It's all about education. Thank you for the holiday. However, what are you going to do next?
That's fantastic. I completely agree with you. And thank you so much for sharing that. I also want to let the audience know that Emma was kind enough to share a list of the organizations that she spoke on earlier. I have sent those, and I will ask that they be put with the live video in the stream there, so that you can refer to them there and research them on your own moving forward. We have about 4 minutes, so I wanted to ask you guys if there is anything we missed, anything you want to make sure to touch on. And I really just want to say thank you guys for coming in and speaking on these issues. I know that it's not easy, and there's a lot of people asking questions. And like we spoke on before, our Black brothers and sisters are very tired. So the fact that you guys are doing this work is very commendable. And I will leave it open for you guys to say your goodbyes and any final thoughts.
I want to take the time to just say thank you for this conversation. I always do a call to action when I have the opportunity. And the call to action is, when we know better, we do better. So do better and be better. Simple as that. Do better and be better.
And I want to add on that it's there's been a lot of conversation about how to become an ally. So how do we support this decision-making process, and how do we support our again, brothers and sisters, their needs? So it's as simple as, how do I become an ally? Typing this on Google and finding whatever you can find and reading all that information. Like, you don't have to go look through encyclopedias. You have Google. It's so accessible and so reachable. So there is really no excuse for us to say that, well, I didn't know about that. You have access to internet. That means you have access to information. So educating yourself, starting from starting small, starting with your friend circle, making that, opening up that conversations. It's really where the change is going to start.
And I'd just like to say thank you for having me on. I greatly apologize about the technical difficulties. Just thank you for having me on. This is very important. Conversations like these are important to have. Now let's go to the action steps and get things done.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, you guys. We had a few technical difficulties, but we made it through. There's a minute to spare. We're just about there. So I will go ahead and wrap this up. And once again, thank you guys, and thank you for the audience tuning in.